Right, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about, are vintage shops actually any good? Now, the premise for this video is me coming from a point of view, I'm just going to say my bias right now, pretty much. My bias is towards charity shops. Like, I love charity shops, and they're my thing. I also like vintage shops, but I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan. And in this video, I'm going to explain the positives and negatives of vintage shopping, in my opinion, and where some better alternatives are. So, firstly, I'm just going to start off and say, vintage shops and charity shops are not directly comparable in terms of what they offer. So obviously they're not that comparable in terms of what their outcomes are, because obviously charity shops are doing it for charity, vintage shops are mainly for profit. And the main thing I would say about vintage shops and charity shops is vintage shops as a collective are all kind of similar, right? Charity shops as a collective, there's lots of different variations, lots of different types and stuff like that, and lots of disparities between pricing in different charity shops, whereas I feel personally vintage shops, you always kind of know what kind of prices you're going to get in those shops, which are less than retail shops, but also not usually as little as charity shops, because obviously in my experience charity shops sometimes have been quite expensive comparatively to other establishments, like even a vintage shop sometimes. The main thing is vintage shops are usually more expensive than charity shops. A positive of vintage shops, which I do have, is they are an experience, right? If you go to one like, I don't know, in Leicester, the Vintage Scene, which is a very nice looking shop, a very lovely shop to go in and like try stuff on and stuff like that. And even like a shop like Urban Outfitters has tried to copy the kind of vintage style of a shop in ways of how the shop looks, how its aesthetic is pleasing towards people, and it's more of an experience than just a shop. That is one thing about vintage shops which is quote unquote good. I'm not that bothered about how the shop looks, I'll be honest with you, but at the same time a lot of people like the experience of going in vintage shops. And I also feel as if another good point about vintage shops, if you are younger, if you are a student, is they are tailored more towards you. So for example, a charity shop, you might find 90% of the stuff is like, I don't want to say like more old people style stuff. It's not very youthful, a lot of the stuff in there. You get a lot of like old knitted wear and stuff like that, and not particularly much young stuff. I'd say usually it's about 90% older people stuff. Depends what you're into though. If you like that as a young person, that's completely fine. And like 10% like more fashionable stuff, usually from my experience, so it does make it a bit harder. So that is a positive of a vintage shop. There is going to be a lot more in there for you than in a charity shop. I would say personally a negative of both, more of vintage shops and charity shops, but a negative of both is quality control, which obviously neither can really control that well, because obviously charity shops especially are just getting given donations for clothes and stuff like that, so they can't really control how good a quality stuff is. Whereas vintage shops, you can go in there sometimes and the stuff is just like wrecked. It's like, how are you even selling this? Well, I went in there once and there was a basketball jersey for like £20. They were selling a basketball jersey for, which is fair enough. I would buy it if it was in good condition. However, it was barely hanging on by a thread. This shirt was, and it was really bad. And I do kind of think the quality, just because it's vintage, doesn't mean that it's always good quality, and the people have looked after it particularly well. You do need to be very careful with secondhand shopping in that sense, and being confident in your knowledge of quality, like looking for quality yourself kind of thing. And that does come with experience. Like it is the thing which you learn and develop. Is this worth the price that I'm paying? Like I said, I've done this for a number of years, and I can usually tell if something is worth the amount of money I'm paying for it. Another good thing about vintage shopping is if you are looking for something very specific, for example, I look for basketball t-shirts, for example, this Brooklyn Nets, I don't know if you can see it, this Brooklyn Nets t-shirt, I look for stuff like that specifically because I love basketball. Whereas in a charity shop, I think I've only ever found 2 or 3 things that are like NBA themed or even American sports themed. In my opinion, vintage shops are a lot more Americanized. There's a lot more American stuff in there, and you're going to more likely find stuff like that if you are looking for it. So if you're looking for specific things, like rare stuff that you probably wouldn't find many places else in the UK, vintage shops are a really good bet to do. In towns as well, it's the other issue I have with vintage shops is there's not that many of them around comparatively to charity shops. You need to go to big cities to find vintage shops. I.e. like Brighton is a good place for vintage shopping. Even Leicester's got a few. Nottingham's really good for vintage shopping as well. But the other thing you need to consider is it's also good for charity shop in these places. I have got a video coming out soon, which is about the best places to go charity shopping and vintage shopping as well. I might add into that. But the main thing is, this is what I would say, and my takeaway from the video would be, right? It's to use both in different senses. For example, I use charity shops for pretty much everything, and I'll go in there, but it's a lot harder to find the things I'm looking for. But it's cheaper, usually, and better pricing. And then for vintage shops, I'm going in there for something specific. So I'm going in there for something like a basketball tee. I'm going in there for something like, I don't know, an American football tee or some jeans specifically, which might be cheaper than retail, and I'm also contributing to not buying new things and helping the environment by not doing that. I'm reusing someone else's clothes. That is a good thing about vintage shopping. You can always find something good, and there's a massive more selection. I don't even know if that's a phrase, but there's a bigger selection at a vintage shop than there is at a charity shop, where, for example, in my section there might only be about like a rail of items in a charity shop, but in a vintage shop you've got like a whole big floor of stuff which you could buy that is like comparable to like your sizing and stuff like that. So it is better in that sense. You do have a lot more choice. But what I would personally say, and what my advice would be, is utilize both. For me, the way I personally do it is charity shops first choice, so that's more general and stuff like that, and see if you can find something like a treasure there. That is more exciting when you go there, for me personally. And then when you go to a vintage shop, I would personally say, if you're looking for something more specific, I'd go there, because of the chance that you're going to find something which is special and different. And that is one of the good points of vintage shopping. So I think the conclusion to this video is, right, there are good points and bad points of vintage shopping, but I think that if you utilize vintage shopping in the right way, it can be worth it. What I would say is, though, don't buy everything from vintage shops. For example, you can buy stuff from charity shops like blank t-shirts, for example, for about £1, £2 from some from some charity shops. You can buy like blank t-shirts, like just black t-shirts, which is what I do my art on, which is what I'm going to paint my stuff on, just in case it gets ruined. And good quality like blank t-shirts as well, like M&S ones you can find in like an Oxfam, anything really. And it's more about, what I'd say is what you're looking for, and that is kind of the conclusion to this video. Use vintage shopping as a tool in secondhand shopping, but I wouldn't use it exclusively. I'd use it in partnership with a charity shop. The charity shop being my first choice because of the price point and stuff like that, and obviously helping out a charity, and then a vintage shop being something that's still helpful for the environment by not buying new clothes, but also you could find something extremely cool and extremely unique there that you won't find anywhere else. And that is the point of the video, is I'd use it. It has a time and a place, but I wouldn't use it exclusively. But that is the end of the video. If you have enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate every single person for watching any of my videos. I really do appreciate you, and thank you.